comes to relationships leading up to marriage and even into marriage itself, Christianity as a whole, I believe, has really missed the mark. Christian parents allow their children to follow the pattern that is set and practiced by the lost world. You would be surprised the number of people in churches who allow their children to go through the dating scene the same way that the world allows their children to go through the dating scene. You'd be surprised how many Christian leaders, pastors, allow their church or their children or the families in their church to just kind of encourage this dating scene, the whole world's view of relationship prior to marriage. Well, in our text, we notice a few things leading up to, as we said, kind of an introductory message here tonight. First thing we notice is the Christian problem. There is a problem in Christianity when it comes to the premarital relationships. We notice a few things about these problems in our verses. In verse number 4, he starts off, verse 3, he's answered and said, "What did Moses command you?" And they said, "Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away." Because so many of those in our Christian homes have resorted to a world's view of relationship, it has left Christian leaders to the point that really they have no option except to accept that. And so because so many, and this is exactly what happened with Moses, is he says, what did Moses say? Well, Moses said we could get a divorce. Well, then he went on to say, well, why did Moses have to say that? Because everybody was doing this and splitting up and handling themselves as the non-Christian. And so he puts this in place. And if this confuses you or bothers you, all you have to do is go back to remember when Israel wanted a king. That was not God's plan, but because of the people, God said, okay, fine, if you want that, here's the way you can do it, but I'm not putting my stamp of approval on it. I'm simply saying I'm going to let you have what it is that you're wanting because you're going to find out that it's not really what you want. And so we see the Christian problem. Verse number 4, the Christian leaders have accepted the world's way of doing things. But verse 5, the reason is because Christians have adapted to the world's way of doing things. Verse 5, Jesus answered and said to them, "For the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept." He had no other option. You were leaving anyway. You were following the world's methods anyway. You were following their little ideas of marriage and ending marriages and leaving and coming together. And you were following all of it anyway. And so Moses was forced to put this precept in that if you're going to do that, at least give a bill of divorce and not just keep all these marriages and everything all chaotic and crazy. The process is that the Christians started doing things the world's way, and soon the leaders had no choice but to accept it as normal. And here's the reason: because it had become the new normal. It had become normal. Well, if you were to ask somebody, what is the normal relationship leading up to marriage? Even in churches, we would say, well, you date somebody, or you get a boyfriend or you get a girlfriend and you date each other and you go out on dates and you go places together and your relationship builds closer and closer and you find out if you're going to be with this person. Well, truth is, if you were to ask somebody in the world what is the process before marriage, you would get the same exact answer. Well, something as holy as marriage, you should not get the same answer inside the church as you do outside the church. That answer should never be the same. And so because many Christians have adapted to the world's ways of dating, and which, by the way, this is another reason I think Christian schools are so important, or home education, whatever the case may be, because there is a lot of pressure. When your children are in the world system, there's a lot of pressure to practice the world's practices. And let me remind you, because I know there are some people I know that have personally given me a hard time. We need Christian kids in the public schools. Our children are not in the place of leading yet. They are still being trained and molded. And if you can't, think of it this way. How well are you at being a good Christian testimony at your job as an adult? And you want your children to act how? They don't have near the experience that you have. They don't have near the foundation that you have. And you don't have near the pressure at your job as they do at their school. I can promise you that. And so we have to be careful, which I think this is part of the problem in the beginning, is our children are put in these situations where, Dad, if I don't do this, if I don't say these words, if we don't do it that way, and here's what it creates. It creates a child who wants to go contrary to their parents but not tell their parents. So they have this secret life over here because they know Mom and Dad wouldn't agree, but they also don't want to be the cast out at their school. And so there's a lot of pressure put on our children in these situations. Among adults who have been married, the following percentages have experienced divorce. Among all adults who have ever been married, 33% have experienced divorce. 33%, that's a pretty high number. 1 out of every 3. 33% of adults have experienced divorce. Those that claim to be atheist or agnostic, 30% of adults have experienced divorce. Of those who claim to be born-again Christians, 32% of adults have experienced divorce. Those who fall under the category of Protestant, 34% have experienced divorce. The lowest group is Catholic at 28. Which, by the way, 28 is still a high number when you think that you're going to go to hell as a result. I mean, it's pretty serious. 33, 34%. Here's what I want you to get out of that. If you do things the world's way, you will get the world's results. Well, I'm a Christian. Doesn't matter. If you date the world's way and you have relationships the world's way, you're going to end up with the world's result. Would we not all agree that the marriage success rate ought to be a lot higher for born-again Christians than those who don't have God? So why are these numbers the same? Why are these numbers so similar? Well, unfortunately, we have adopted and we have adapted to the world's philosophies when it comes to relationships and dating and getting to know one another and the time spent with one another and giving our heart to one another. We have adopted and adapted to the world's philosophies, and as a result, we get the world's results. And we sit in our churches scratching our heads saying, why are we having so many troubles in marriages and churches? Well, can I encourage us tonight? It doesn't start at the marriage. It starts way before that, because there is a big picture that God has for us. For each one of us individually, there's a plan that God has for your life, and we must understand that. So we notice the Christian problem. And then second thing we notice in our text is God's response to the Christian problem. And some of these verses we're going to look at a couple different times, but look at verse number 6. Here's God's response. But from the beginning of the creation, Moses allowed you to do this, but let me tell you how God has felt about it from the beginning. He's never changed his mind. From creation. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the Sermon on the Mount when he said, you have heard an eye for an eye, but I say unto you. You have heard, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say unto you. You have heard these things, and these are the law, and these are the things said. But let me tell you my heart is that you not even hate a man. My heart is that you not even look with lust in your heart. My heart is these things. And the same way is true with this. They say, Moses said this. Yes, but let me tell you how God has felt about relationships from the beginning of creation. His mind has never changed. And so he tells us a little bit of this heart. Verse number 6, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. God's plan, God has never accepted, this is so important, God has never accepted the world's way of doing things. Never. He may allow Christians to make their choices and make their decisions, but just because God allows us to make our decisions and to see the consequences does not mean God approves of those decisions. And as a whole, this is an area where Christians have really given in to the world's view, and God has allowed them to do that. But God himself has never felt that way. He has never changed his mind. You cannot do things the world's way and expect different results. You cannot do it. If you're going to have a worldly view of relationships leading up to marriage, do not expect your divorce rate to be different. If you're going to have the world's way of relationships prior to marriage, don't be surprised if you end up heartbroken and frustrated and fighting and all of these hindrances in a marriage, because that is the result of doing things the world's way. I don't care what subject we're talking about. The world's way of doing things, when it contradicts God's way of doing things, will not create peace and understanding and love and unity and all of these things that God intends us to experience. Christians must get back to knowing God's way of doing things if we are going to have a different result than the world. We have to get back to knowing God's way. God, what is your way? I know what the world's way is, but God, what is your way? For every teenager in here, that has to be your attitude. God, what is your way for me? God, what is your plan for me? I know how the world does it. And I know the world, isn't the world good at making worldliness look fun? Boy, they're good at it. The commercials of everybody up on a open balcony with all the alcohol and everybody just having this great time. Everybody fun, everybody happy. Boy, for every one person that's happy, I could take you to 150 that are miserable because they're hooked on this. And it's destroying their lives. But the world has a way of making worldliness look fun, and it's no different when it comes to the dating world. Well, really, especially compared to the boring old Bible way. That's the way the world wants us to view it, isn't it? Oh, you're one of those Christians. You're no fun. You're not enjoyable. You're no fun. You're one of them boring people. Listen, when you hear that, just leave, because that's not God telling you that. That's the world telling you that. But the heart of every teenager in here has to be, God, I know the world's way, but I want to know your way. And that's my desire tonight as an introduction, is to get every young person in here to the place where they say, God, what do you have for me? How do you want me to have these relationships leading up to having the marriage that you would want me to have? So we see God's response to the Christian problem. And again, kind of just overview-wise, we then notice in our text God's plan for the unmarried Christian. God's plan for the unmarried Christian. Verse number 6. But from the beginning, God created, the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. He's not implying anything here other than these are two different people. There's a male, has life here, and there's a female who has a life here. Two different people. He goes on to say, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. Look at verse number 8. And they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. 3 different times he mentions in this. And 4, really, if you look at the references that are made, he mentions these are two different people. 2 different worlds. 2 different sets of parents. Don't lose me on this. I know this is very basic, but this is extremely important. 2 different, possibly 2 different wills for their life from God. 2 different plans that are set before them. 2 different, everything is different. You have one individual here and you have one individual there, and they stand alone. They're not connected. The 2 shall stay 2 until God makes them one. This is extremely important going into relationships for many different reasons. They have 2 different lives, 2 different sets of parents, 2 different sets of God's will, 2 different individuals seeking God's direction. The reason that is important is because when you don't know who the other person is, you have to worry about you. That's it. I'm worried about me. I need to be right. I need to have the right focus. I need to be what God wants me to be. It is extremely important that two people not become one before God makes it clear that this is his will. Now let me illustrate this in a way that if you've been in church a long time, you've probably seen these type of illustrations. There is an individual here who has God's plan. This is their heart. This is what they're going to give to somebody one day. They're going to give their heart to whoever God allows them to give it to. Well, there's somebody else over here that I told our children the other day, there's only one rule about marriage in our church, and that is no boy in our church is allowed to marry the pastor's daughter. That's just the only rule. So, I'm just kidding. Well, right now I'm not. I don't know any worthy, but maybe one day we'll see. This is you individually, though. You have a heart that you are going to give to somebody, that God wants you to give to somebody one day. You have this. It's in good condition right now. It's your job to keep it that way, to keep that heart the way that God wants it to be, to keep it pure, to keep it whole. We've seen the illustration, and I think it's important, but the way the world's dating scene often goes is sometimes starting as young as, I'm surprised how young people talk about, this is my boyfriend, this is my girlfriend. And we'll get into the age part of things and when to seriously start praying about God's will. But it's not that young. It's not 14. It's not 15. It's not 16. All right, everybody with me? And it's probably not 17. Probably not 18, but, God's will, who knows? If it's my daughter, no. Yours, maybe. I don't know. I'll pray. But here's what happens with the normal dating scene. You find somebody in a relationship with, and you start sharing your emotion with them. This is a very sacred part of you. This is an important part of you. But as you get talking and as you get laughing and your emotions start trading back and forth. See, what happens at this point is now we have a connection together that I don't have with anybody else in the youth group or at school or church or whatever the case may be. What's happening is, without even realizing it, we're starting to become one in certain areas. We're trading our emotion. We're trading our feelings. I'm going to give another part of my heart. We just start taking pieces of our heart and, now, I don't understand why my parents don't allow things, so now I'm going to share just some tears with them. Now we're getting real deep, right? Yep. Oh, man. I don't think this is going to work anymore. I'll take those back. Now I'm not going to share my emotions. I'm not going to share my tears. I'm not going to share my feelings. That one's ended. We broke up. Well, it doesn't take a genius to find out this isn't healthy. Because then what's going to happen is I'm going to come to somebody else. Oh, I think I like this person. I'll start sharing my emotions with them now. They're real funny. They're neat. And share my feelings some. And this person's a lot different, so, you're a lot better than the last person I dated, Brother Don. So for you, I'm going to share personal information with you. How do I know that this is who God wants me to share personal information with? Well, I really like them. Whoop-dee-doo. Not to be unkind, but seriously. I don't think this is going to work. My last relationship, they cared more. When I cried to them, they at least cared. So I'm going to come over here. Oh, yes. I'm going to share some. But you know what, Gage, you're just a good listener. So I'm just going to talk a lot to you. I'm going to give you a lot of my words. And then when my heart breaks, I'll share that with you because you're just a good listener. But this isn't going to work. I need that back. This is what's important. Because now, who is going to want this? Yep. That's right. Who wants that? What do you have to offer? Well, let's see here. I think it makes up a heart. I've shared a lot with other people, but I can still share with you. Well, who wants seconds? Who wants to take just the leftovers? Let me explain what this does. And I understand it's a silly illustration and our heart doesn't actually tear in pieces and all those things. But let me explain why this is important and why it is applicable. This causes in a young person a spirit of comparison. I'm going to compare how you respond to my emotion to how my last boyfriend, girlfriend responded to emotion. And I'm going to compare how you respond to listening to my words to how my last relationship. And so it becomes a spirit of comparison. Well, my last boyfriend, they this. Whoop-de-doo, I'm not your last boyfriend. See, this is personal for a pastor because that's what we hear. Well, my last pastor, whoop-de-doo, I'm not your last pastor. I'm your new pastor. Well, when I shared heartache with so-and-so, they really cared. It just seems like you don't even care. Well, how would you know? Except for the fact that you're comparing how everybody else has responded to this. And young ladies, let me challenge you here. You got to be real careful because it's real easy to get caught in the mode of seeking that attention. How do they respond to my emotion? How do they respond to my heartache? How do they respond to my care? How do they respond to all of these things? And you can seek attention just based on who responds best. And it can create this spirit of comparison. Let me tell you what else it'll create. It'll create a spirit of compromise. Well, I'm not gonna do that anymore. It didn't go well with my last boyfriend. I'm not gonna talk like that. I'm not gonna say that. I'm not gonna do this. Oh, I'm gonna do this because then I can keep my relationship and I can keep my boyfriend, I can keep my girlfriend, I can keep this going. And so instead of me being who I am compared to God, I start evaluating how my past relationships have gone and I start compromising who I am as a person because I want people to like me. I don't want this boyfriend to leave me. Why did he leave me? I don't understand why he broke up with me. Probably because you talk all the time. That's probably the reason. That's probably not the reason, but it makes me feel good. Well, I don't know why so here's what happens. You start in relationships, it's like you're walking a tightrope. Because my last relationship, I really liked him. I don't know what went wrong. I don't know. So instead of me just being who I am according to God and the upbringing that I have and the training my parents have given me and walking confidently in that and trusting God, instead of that, I'm walking on a tightrope because I don't want to mess up another relationship. I don't want another person to break up with me. I don't want them to not like me anymore. Everybody okay with this? It creates a spirit of compromise even within your own self. Well, I don't want to do this I don't want to do this. Listen, there ought to be a confidence in the heart of a young person that says, God has a big plan for me. My parents have raised me. Our church is teaching us. I have a pastor to help me. I have parents to help me. I have God who is molding me and creating me. I can walk confidently as God has created me. And if somebody has a problem with who I am as God is making me, then I don't want them in a relationship anyway. There ought to be a confidence in that. But instead, the dating scene creates a spirit of compromise. It creates a spirit of comparison. But then also, it creates a spirit of, I think I had a third one on here. It creates a spirit of competition. How can I get this one? How can I get that one? How can I have this person as my boyfriend or this person as my girlfriend? It creates this spirit of, oh, you're lucky, you're dating so-and-so, or you're dating so-and-so. Oh, you already have a boyfriend, you already have a girlfriend. There's this spirit of competition, and it has nothing to do with God's plan. It's just the pressures of the world to do things the world's way. Now think about this. Instead of a person coming with a pure heart, saying, God, I'm trusting you, trusting the upbringing I've had, trusting the direction that you've given me. This is my heart, and I'm going to keep it pure until the time that the two hearts become one. Instead, we end up with this, walking a tightrope, afraid to make anybody not like me. Well, if you're walking a tightrope with this, compromised, comparing, in competition, God could bring the one that he has for you right before your eyes, and you may not even see it. And truth is, if that's the condition you're in, God may have somebody else for that person because they've kept their heart pure. They've kept it the way God wants it to be. So we notice the way that we are not supposed to do it. Let me give you this as a help. We have our heart that is in pieces, and we are waiting for the right person to give this to. Here's what I have left. But here's the problem. Some pieces you can't get back. Some pieces you cannot get back. You realize the first person that you give a kiss to, you can never get that back. You can never get that piece back. Ever. First person you hold hands with, you can never get that back. Never. See, it sounds real good. You're like, oh no, I'll just gather all these pieces back. You can't get all the pieces back. And there are some things you will never be able to give the person that God has given in your life because somebody else has that, and they will always have that. I think we would all agree that wouldn't be God's plan. It's not God's plan. And this is part of the problem, even when he talked about divorce and all of that. He said he gave you the divorce, but God's plan is that you remain one, because there are parts of you that will always be with that other person. And it is not God's design. And so we see he really informs him, here is the life of marriage, or life before marriage. You have one heart. Keep it pure. Keep it together. Keep it right. Understanding that God has a plan for me. My parents are helping me. My church is helping me. God is molding me. This is my heart, and I am not giving it to anyone until it is time to give it to them. And then when it's time, I don't have to give them a piece, Brother Don. I get to give them the whole thing. Well, wouldn't that be wonderful? Well, wouldn't that be wonderful to be able to know that when you stand at an altar, that you're not just trading vows. You're saying, here is my heart. It is whole. It is complete. And for the person opposite of you to say, here is my heart. And it is whole. And it is complete. Boy, wouldn't that be wonderful? To on that day when you join hands, to get that tingly feeling. And on that day when he says you may kiss the bride, to get that warm, tingly feeling of embarrassment because everybody's watching you and you have no clue what you're doing. Practicing on your pillows will not work. It's not the same as somebody kissing back. But wouldn't it be great to have that heart whole, complete? Well, it's a wonderful thing. A wonderful thing. Now, please don't misunderstand this. God can take broken hearts, and he can do great things with them. But even broken hearts know some things are not the same. They know that. So we see God's plan for the unmarried Christian. So let's look, since we're just talking big picture here, let's look at God's plan for the married Christian. Verse number 7, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. And they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. You see what starts off, who has my heart, Brother Don? You gave it to Miss Rebecca? Ay, ay, ay. Two people standing with their heart pure. You know what God does on that day that you get married? He makes it one. One heart. See, if you still try to live after marriage as two hearts, it's not going to work. Well, I want this. Well, I want this. Well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. You're just tearing, you're not tearing up two hearts. You're taking one heart and splitting it, but yet wanting it to be whole. The two become one. So young people, God's plan for the married, once you get married, is for those two hearts to create one whole heart. One complete heart, one pure heart. And God looks down, he sees where these two have become one. After marriage, they combine all that made them one, and God makes them one together. Their commitment and loyalties change. Look at verse 7. Shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife? You see, there's a commitment and a loyalty to parents at this phase. I'm here. I'm under their leadership. I'm under their authority. Once the two become one, now he says, submit yourselves one to another. Your loyalty is to each other. Well, what about my parents? Honor your parents. The Bible says to. We're supposed to honor your parents. But my commitment is here. There's a lot of Bible illustrations that deal with this. But he says, the two shall become one. Leave father and mother and become one. That's God's plan. Doesn't mean that you don't have your parents there to help you. But parents have to be real careful. Have to be real careful not softening those hard times too much. Here's a good parenting tip. You ready? Your job as a parent is not to make all the decisions for your children until they leave. Your job as a parent is to teach them to make decisions while they're in your home, while you're there to help them, so that when they do leave, they're able to make their own decisions. But if I'm going to make all the decisions for them right now and then say, okay, now you go do that, it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good. Well, don't you think your kids will mess up? Oh yeah. They already have, actually. Kids make bad decisions. You give them some leeway, they learn. But while they're in my home, I want them to learn. So I can be there and instruct and help and coach before they get out in the world on their own. But then when marriage comes and the two become one, now they work together. They pray together. They lean on each other. And if we're not careful, I want to say this properly, if we're not careful, we'll forget that this married couple has spiritual leaders and their pastor, and mom and dad will try to be their pastor. You've got to let them have a pastor now. You've got to let them grow spiritually now. You've got to let them go to the spiritual counselors, advisors, whoever is in their life, and let them build that marriage that God has given them. After marriage for the Christian God has a plan for them. It really is a picture of a whole heart being saved and preserved and giving each other that heart. When God is the one that joins them together, here's what he says. I want you to look at this as we close. Verse number 9. When everything's done properly, what therefore God hath joined together, and we'll deal with that in the next session. What God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Anybody know what that word asunder means? It literally means in pieces. Now I want you to notice what it said. What God hath joined together, two whole hearts. What God hath joined together, don't let man tear it into pieces. Which means this, you can do everything right, but if you don't keep doing right, you can still end up in a mess. Well, we had the right kind of relationship and now it's a mess. Well, you let man tear us under. You let things tear it apart. See, marriage is a constant work. Constant. Always building, always growing, always learning, always in different phases of life, but we are learning together as one heart, one life, moving forward. Young people, let me challenge you tonight. You need to know the big picture. You don't need to know the details of the big picture. You don't need to know who it is and you're going to marry and when you're going to meet them and where you're going to meet them. Here's the big picture that you need to know. You have a heart that God has given you. Keep it pure. Keep it right. My dad used to tell me this. Attention towards all, intention towards none. In other words, it's okay for young men in the church to talk to and have friends be friends with the young ladies of a church. That's okay. Just don't give your heart away. See, we've been so scared in our churches, we don't even let hearts talk to each other because we're afraid we're going to give it away. Right? I mean, from the youngest of classrooms, boys here, girls here on the bus, boys here, girls here. I mean, all the way through life, boys here, girls here. And then we wonder when they become adults and start talking to each other, they don't know what to do. You're saying, talk to people. Be friends with one another. I've talked to Brother Josh many times. One of my pet peeves in the church is for when a boy talks to a girl, everybody's like, oh, do they like each other? No, they go to the same church. Like, why does that have to be weird? They attend church together. They're serving the Lord together. They're friends with each other. And as long as they keep that heart pure and keep it in the hands of mom and dad and their pastor and those that God have put in their life and in the hands of God, keep that heart pure. Talk to people, have fun, have your friends. Just know these people might not be the one God has for me. So I'm not going to give my heart to them. But there's certainly nothing wrong with having good, friendly conversation with one another. Protect what God has given you. That's the big picture. Protect this. Because someday you're going to want somebody to give you a protected heart. So return the favor.